the revolution in the future will come and is coming from the raw materials. So if you want to change something into a sustainable product or into a circular one, you have to have two things. Good raw materials that are capable of, let's say, resolving the problems. Secondly, eco-design or design for remanufacturing. So you have to redesign products in a sustainable and circular way.
Welcome to HeroInside, the Ingredient Branding podcast with Tomas Vucurevic. In each episode, Tomas will draw from his vast experience as the go-to global ingredient branding expert and will discuss this subject with visionaries and pioneers in the field. How do you go from the zero position as a supplier of a new ingredient to the hero position in demand around the world? Let's find out.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the HeroInside Ingredient Branding podcast. My name is Tomas Vucurevic and I'm the host of this podcast. As the founder and managing director of Brand, I have spent more than 40,000 hours in the domain of ingredient branding. And as you probably heard in our episode 0, my first guest is Giulio Bonazzi, the visionary behind the ECONYL brand, which was named by Business Vogue as fashion's most favorable sustainable material. As the CEO of the Italian company Aquafil, Mr. Bonazzi has spearheaded the creation of ECONYL, a regenerated nylon derived from nylon waste. For our first episode, I absolutely wanted to talk to Giulio because I'm so impressed how ECONYL has been adopted by major brands like Gucci, Prada, and Burberry in a relatively short period of time. The brand name might not be familiar to some of you, but believe me, in the world of high fashion, everyone knows it. So join us as we delve into ECONYL's innovative journey and explore how it's not only addressing environmental challenges, but really stands out as one of the most compelling and successful next-generation ingredient brands. Enjoy. Let's start with a very warm welcome and sincere thank you to Giulio Bonazzi for being the first guest on my podcast. Welcome, Giulio.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here and part of your program.
Yeah, there are many reasons for that you are our first guest, especially, obviously, the fantastic work you and your team have done over the last 10 years, actually 12 years. But there's also a very personal reason. Shortly after I started my own business, I was sitting in my office in Ljubljana, reading about an investment made into a new depolymerization plant at Aquafil SpA, whose production facility I could actually see from my office window. So I dug a little bit deeper and ended up writing you a personal letter. And shortly after, we were sitting together in Arco on the beautiful Garda Lake, and the story began. So, Giulio, we've known each other since then, but some of our listeners might not have heard of ECONYL. So could you please explain in your own words who you are and what exactly you do, just briefly?
Well, I am Giulio Bonazzi and I am the CEO of a company called Aquafil. Aquafil is a global leader in the production of nylon fiber, especially for carpet flooring and for the fashion industry. What is making us different is not only that we are global and that, of course, we are making a lot of specialty products, but the fact that we are making today almost 50% of our nylon fibers through a special recycling system that we have called ECONYL. ECONYL is exactly the same identical nylon molecule, but that instead of taking petroleum raw materials from the planet is starting from nylon waste. Nylon waste, particularly ugly like fishing nets or carpets that we are collecting or taking from all over the world and then bringing them to Ljubljana and returning it to the original building blocks, which is the monomer. And this can be done an infinite number of times. So this is ECONYL and is today the flagship product of more than 2,500 companies around the world.
2,500 companies are already using the material. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what were your thoughts back then in 2011, 2012? Were you already aware of the topic of ingredient branding, and what ultimately made you decide to go for this very specific go-to-market model for ECONYL?
Our journey started even earlier than 2011 when the plant started up. But of course, when we started up with the plant and we started to, going and visiting customers with this idea of selling them a sustainable and potentially circular ingredient, we immediately realized the power of what we were offering. And thanks to you, in fact, we had this kind of discussion trying to also introduce a branding to our ingredient. Yes, we are supplying an ingredient to our customer, but this ingredient is very often the most important one. This is valid both for our, textile customers as well as for our carpet customers. And of course, we started to think, well, maybe one day someone else will succeed in repeating what we are now making in Ljubljana. So we said, it is good if we also try, of course, to introduce a branding, in this way, of course, protecting our story and also creating value through an ingredient branding policy.
Wonderful. If we briefly jump from the beginning now to today, before we will take a closer look at some individual steps, where do you stand today and what do you think about the brand's development so far? Because I have heard you also saying that if I would have known what was to come, I might not have ever started the project in the first place, right? It was definitely not easy, wasn't it?
Well, and believe me that we're still at the beginning. We are not yet at the middle of our journey or at the end of our journey. Of course, we had to resolve a lot of very challenging technical problems. So, in fact, before the plant could run in a very consistent way, we took at least 2.5 years. But still today, we are working in order to improve it, in order to validate new waste streams, and finally to introducing circularity within the business, because it's a fantastic story and absolutely environmentally sound to collect fishing nets instead of abandoning them in the seas and in the oceans. But the real circularity will be reached when we make carpet-to-carpet recycling or textile-to-textile recycling. And this is, the next challenge that we have to be confronted with.
Yeah, and it's still only less than 1% when we look at the newest report from Textile Exchange. So the textile-to-textile recycling or carpet-to-carpet recycling still remains a huge opportunity for you and also others working in that sphere. A question about your company, Giulio. Aquafil was not a startup when you launched ECONYL, but it was already an established company, a key player in the production of nylon 6 for various industries, especially carpet industry, but also the automotive sector. So Aquafil was in this typical role of a supplier. So how did your colleagues, employees, and customers reacted when you presented them the idea of building an ingredient brand? Was that a shock to them, or were they confused about it? Did they like it? What was their reaction?
In fact, as you are saying, this is exactly a transformational project. So we wanted to transform a company consuming petroleum-based raw material and a lot of energy into a company having a minimal to zero carbon footprint impact to, of course, not taking raw materials from the planet any longer. And when we actually announced and started to act, introducing this incredible solution to the market, everybody laughed at us. And also some of our, colleagues, even manager, couldn't believe. And you can imagine when, on top of the technical challenge, we decided also to launch a ingredient branding project. Well, you can imagine touching very important customers and going by them and saying, well, I will not sell you ECONYL if you don't accept to testimony or to be part of our journey, including our brand into your product. Well, at the beginning, they totally refused, or most of them refused this request made by us. So it was just a matter of being consistent and waiting. And after, some time, at the end, everybody accepted it. And this was very, very important because today everybody in the industry knows about ECONYL. And without that initial effort, this would have not resulted in such a great success.
Yeah, I still remember those presentations with your leadership team, but also the broad brand training sessions we held literally with all of the employees, because the cultural aspect for the success of a brand is critical. After all, as you said, it's a real transformational process from a supplier of unbranded products to an ingredient brand embraced by Gucci, Prada, Burberry, or BMW, right? So how would you today judge this cultural importance of the brand? A lot of people also talk about employee branding. So is ECONYL also helping you, let's say, to attract talents, to keep talents in the company, and to be a favorite employer?
Training. It's a continuous effort in training our personnel, in training ourselves, including myself, and of course, training our customers, sometimes even the customers of our customers. So we have got a lot of carpet companies that came and asked us to welcome their customers or their distributors or agents in order to help them with specific training. So today we have also developed a lot of digital tools in order to make it, virtually and not only physically. This, of course, you can imagine how important they were during the COVID period. But even today, when you have to train someone who is sitting in Japan, well, it's not so easy to have them here in Europe and especially in Slovenia. And on top of that, this incredible effort in communication resulted also in a much greater opportunity for attracting talents. So we received and still are receiving a lot of requests of work from young and less young talented people, male and females, from all over the world. So today we are having people even from Iran. Can you imagine asking us to come and, work for us here in Europe? And not because we are in Europe, but because of ECONYL.
Great. And I think the aspect that you are mentioning around repetition of training and also being very consistent with your positioning and your brand promise is extremely important. Particularly as an ingredient brand, you must have one very clear message, and that one very clear message must be repeated and repeated and repeated. And a lot of times other partners want to change that messaging because maybe they are bored or they want to sell you new communication concepts or strategies. But my experience is also from my time, when we are totally bored about our story, the world hasn't yet understood it and hasn't yet learned it. And it takes much, much longer to really build that brand. We talk about that in a moment. So going to the beginning one more time, what aspect of the brand journey still would you say did you initially underestimate, or what was your biggest learning while you were building this ingredient brand over now more than a decade, at the beginning with smaller brands, not so known brands, and now having this 2,500 brand partners?
Well, it's been a long journey, and there have been several steps. Of course, the first one was to build, a brand recognition by the customers, to be very consistent with the communication message, to be absolutely against any greenwashing, and any kind of just showing what is most exciting. So, for example, as you can imagine, when we speak about fishing nets, everybody is super excited. When we speak about other kind of waste, they are much less enthusiastic. So the customers, normally, they tend to adopt only or to speak only about the part of the fishing net. And we have, of course, to explain to them that in reality, it is not just, ECONYL is not just made by fishing nets. Yes, it is very true that we are recycling several thousand of tons of fishing nets per year, getting closer or even more than 10,000 tons per year of fishing nets, which is, of course, a lot. But ECONYL is not made just by fishing nets. It is one component. It's one waste stream. So it's a continuous effort. It's not something that you are able to make every day, and you learn. Every day you are learning something, how to better communicate. And this is still related to a B2B communication process. If you want to jump and make a B2B2C communication, it's a further challenge that you have to, surpass, to resolve, and, different system also of communicating to the final consumer, so the one who is buying and using the stuff.
Yeah, totally agree. It's a journey, and at Brain we always say it takes about 10 years to really establish an ingredient brand, because you are also, when you start working 18 months, 24 months into the next seasons of your customers, so you have to also consider the whole first sell-in period until a first product is made. Recently, at one of the trade shows, I also talked to an Italian supplier. Said, look, the moment we show somebody a new material, it takes 1 year until we maybe get a first order, and then you have the whole process of making the products and then selling them. So it takes maybe 10 years.
And you take 10 years to build your reputation and
Yes.
1 day to destroy it.
Yes.
So you have to be very, very careful,
So at what point did you feel we've made it? When was that tipping point for the brand? I remember, I think it was maybe 5-6 years on that journey. You started to collaborate with Kelly Slater, who is a surf icon. Obviously had a lot of credibility to stand out for cleaner oceans, and had his own brand. Was that such a moment, or were they other ones where you had the feeling from now on the ball is running downhill and we don't have to push so much uphill anymore?
I have to be honest, and I have to confess to you that I'm still thinking that we are going uphill, and never going downhill. That's a sad feeling, that I'm having every single day. But let's say we took in the carpet industry, it went faster because of the nature of some of our customers that were already very much oriented toward sustainability. And so they adopted ECONYL very, very quickly. In the fashion industry, it took much longer because, especially at the beginning, it was considered just by a few players, let's say, an integral part of their strategy. Like, if you go by Stella McCartney has started from the very beginning with the idea of using or changing, let's say, non-sustainable raw materials with more sustainable ones. Because let's remember that fully sustainable today, nothing exists. So clearly, when you go by, maybe one moment that I said, well, we are making it, is when people like Stella McCartney decided to adopt ECONYL as, let's say, their ingredient, and started to communicate. And Stella herself, she mentioned very often about ECONYL. Kelly Slater was another very important moment, because was maybe the first real brand ambassador of ECONYL. And, Kelly Slater is one of the most famous athlete in the world. And believe me, if you want to sponsor him, he is not inexpensive. Okay. And he did it for free, so he felt that ECONYL was an important part for his, fashion or apparel business that he wanted to launch. And so these were maybe two of the most important moments. Then we arrived between 2017, 2018, and 2019, and the market started to turn around. So it started to become something that if you didn't have the policy for becoming more sustainable or sustainable, you were at risk. So people started to come a little later. For example, Italian brands came a little later than the ones that I've mentioned you before.
Another mantra of ours in our work at Brained is that we have this love for innovators and that we want to help companies to generate more value from their innovations through ingredient branding. I was listening the other day to the publication of your 9 months financial report, and you said something very important, namely that the resilience of the ECONYL brand is particularly evident in difficult market conditions. You said you are gaining market share, you are winning new customers, and that you are also receiving more interest in the automotive segment. This is exactly the result of why we want to build brands, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it is.
Have you achieved your economic goals with the brand? And would you say that you are getting a good return on your brand investments?
Yes, I would say so. And we are extremely happy of, let's say, the investments we have made so far for promoting our brand. And I believe that was an essential part of our project. The revolution in the future will come and is coming from the raw materials. So if you want to change something into a sustainable product or into a circular one, you have to have two things. Good raw materials that are capable of, let's say, resolving the problems. Secondly, eco-design or design for remanufacturing. So you have to redesign products in a sustainable and circular way. But then, of course, you have to communicate this vis-a-vis with the final consumer. So clearly, ingredient branding is absolutely of an incredible importance to create the value of your project.
That's for us so good to hear that, after reviewing these cases, after many, many years, or having the chance to talk with you after, 10 years, that we get such a feedback that also inspires us to, help new clients develop new ingredient brands. Because I think at the Textile Exchange, somebody said, as you said, the raw materials are the key to the castle. And then I said, okay, but then ingredient brands are the key makers to that castle. So let's take a look into the future. We've talked now about the past 10, 12 years. How do you see the next 10 years for ECONYL? Is collaboration becoming more important for you? I know you are a member of the Effective Group, and you are also working on alternative raw materials, don't you?
Well, I believe that the next 10 years will be totally marked by collaboration throughout the value chain, because when you want to recycle, you can do it by yourself, alone. But when you want to achieve circularity, you need to involve the entire value chain, from the raw material waste suppliers to the end or the final customer, including, of course, all the reverse logistical people that will have to collect and taking back your, let's say, products back to the factory in order to be fully and perfectly recycled for second, third, fourth generation of products. So this will be our mantra for the next 10 years. And I believe, yes, we are having also other important projects on our pipeline, but the ECONYL or ECONYL 1 is still at its beginning. So what we are now going to introduce will be solutions for circularity to our customers. So giving a full range or spectrum of, let's say, ingredients made with our ECONYL nylon that can be not only fabrics, but also other parts like zippers and buttons and others that are necessary if you want to design a circular product, or to recycle nylon waste that are together with other components that are non-recyclable so far, like nylon spandex or elastane fabrics. Please remember that we have more than 600 customers worldwide making swimwear or sport apparels that are, using ECONYL as their let's say, flagship product, but 99% of these products are having spandex inside. And nylon spandex fabrics are non-recyclable. So we will have to resolve also this kind of equations, so making recyclable and circular what is not today. So still we have a lot of work in front of us in the ECONYL sphere.
You invest a lot in your sustainability efforts, both as a brand, but also as a company. Your sustainability reports are a real benchmark. So how important remains this in the times of increasing demand for transparency, but also significant increase of legal requirements ahead of us through the EU Green Deal and other measurements, and also the condemnation of greenwashing. So you have been a benchmark and the first mover. Will you continue in this way, do ever more than the others trying to lead this topic?
Indeed, we are a benchmark, and thank you for touching this very sensitive topic, because, of course, with the European Green Deal, and especially when Ursula von der Leyen was elected, as chief of the European Commission, in her speech, she spoke about two sectors, construction and textile. How to make these two important industries, more sustainable and circular within the end of this decade, which is an unbelievable challenge, as you can imagine. So for us, it is important to continue investing not only in branding, but also in communication for avoidance of greenwashing, which is something that is absolutely, for us, the base of our everyday action. Secondly, of course, for reaching, for full circularity. So these are the two things. And there are multiple examples of legislation through extended producer responsibility systems that are firstly, for example, in Europe, started against the usage of single-use plastics, but are already including fishing nets and apparel products for 2025 year, that, we have to be prepared. It will take some time before this will result in fines or in extra cost for the industry. But don't believe that this is taking too long, and that what could be the result could be minimal. I am afraid that there are people talking between 10 to 12 million tons of textile waste, discarded every day or every year in Europe. You can imagine how much it costs, to collect and, dispose, if not recycling, this kind of unbelievable amount of waste. So we have to be careful, because the time is passing very quickly, and 2025 is, tomorrow morning.
We are receiving a lot of input and getting contacts from startups in the past years. We've set up an ingredient brand masterclass where we work online together with those startups who also have a different way of how they want to be consulted. They don't want the company to come in and walk away, come back after 6 weeks and say, look, this is your strategy. But they like to do it collaboratively, also with others, learn from each other, understand how other companies in similar situations, startup situations, would tackle the problems that they have. So what advice would you give to a startup or a company that is in the same position as you have been in 2012? Again, is that ingredient brand view worth the climb? And why should they also consider launching an ingredient brand versus just trying to have a new to the world technology or solution?
I don't know if I am in the position of giving any advice, but what I can say is that if you're having something that is worth, it is also correct and necessary to communicate it. And so ingredient branding, if of course you are, let's say, developing, new ingredients that are having some value, is or should be an integral part of your project.
Good. We're coming slowly to the end. Giulio, so fascinating to listen to your thoughts on sustainability, and particularly circular, which is really something much bigger and also something more complex, as you explained. But I would like to introduce you to a small ritual I would like to establish with my guests. First, as I would also like to give you the opportunity, if you have a specific question or challenge for me on the topic of ingredient branding, or if you have something that's in your mind where you say, this is where we really struggle, or what we are interested in. Do you have something like this, or did you solve all the problems?
Well, a lot, but the biggest struggle is really to differentiate what we are doing against what others are doing, because of course you can't pretend that the final consumer is an expert of every, stuff that he or she is buying or using. This is impossible. Not even the industry. Most of the time is so much, say, knowledgeable about, if you go by, believe it or not, that if you go by some customer and you speak about nylon or polyester or polypropylene, for them, they are all the same. So this is equally valid for the final consumer, or even more, So this is the biggest, struggle. So our point or our really biggest challenge now is to establish the brand toward the 8 billion people that are living in the planet, which is, of course, a much bigger challenge than, of course, promoting the brand to 2 or 3 or 4,000 customers, which is already a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges ingredient brands are always facing, particularly at the beginning and when they start, is, when the big brands are screening the market and there is a new technology, there is this, natural born reflex of brands to demand exclusivity, right? And I'm always saying exclusivity is the enemy of the ingredient branding. And you demonstrated, I think, in the high fashion industry as well as in the automotive industry, that you can build an ingredient brand without exclusivity. So what's your recipe?
That's exactly an important point, because, of course, especially when you go by, big names, big customers, very famous ones, they are demanding for exclusivity. But if you have something which is revolutionary, you cannot give it just to one company or to one customer, because, of course, if you are doing so, at the end, it will be their brand that will be, of course, the brand, and not your brand, which will be part of the brand, So clearly, this is more important when you go by, customers, especially in the luxury industry or in the automotive. Especially when you go in the automotive sector, you are, in our case at the beginning, we were mostly on the flooring side. To speak about how the carpet of your car is made was not so sexy. Now, of course, something is changing because in reality, the part of a car, of an auto, which is not recycled is the textile part. So this is, a crucial problem for the automotive industry. A lot of challenges. For example, you mentioned BMW, that, the different automotive makers are asking to the industry in order to supply, different, generations of ingredients. Of course, what they are asking is that they have to be sustainable, circular, and don't ask me 1 penny more, because this is, especially valid for the automotive people that are so sensitive from the price standpoint. So it's a real challenge.
Yeah, and coming back to the point of exclusivity or non-exclusivity, we are always referring to that when we talk with our clients, that if you want to stimulate a transformational change into something new, it's very important that this new material or technology is offered by lots of brands, because only then the consumers are also perceiving it as something neutral or as that seal of quality or seal of trust. And as long as it's only offered by one brand, it always has this marketing connotation of somebody wants to sell me something. And I think that's part of this educational process to brands if they want to participate in transformational change, that they have to accept that many companies together have to provide the same solution. So to generate that credibility beyond their own marketing efforts. So the second point of this small ritual, Giulio, would be to ask you for a recommendation. Who would you like to hear from about their ingredient brand? Do you have anybody you could nominate as a guest where you would say, oh, if this person would come to the Brandery podcast, I would tune in?
Oh, well, I don't know. There are many, not only one, but depends if you are thinking about customers in terms of brands or in terms of, physical person, So, of course, if you think about brands, my desire, especially in the fashion industry, would be to see really, the biggest and fast fashion companies really involved in changing the nature of their business, which is for them the biggest challenge. Because believe me that for the luxury companies, to adopt even more expensive raw materials, yes, it is of course a problem, but for them to sell a backpack at 1,400 euros instead of 1,300, it is not a problem. They will not sell less, But on the other side, especially for the ones that are selling at much lower prices, this is, the biggest challenge. If you speak about people, the famous influencers, because of course this would help to penetrate more quickly, the knowledge of the final consumer. So
great. We will see if we can find some of them and get them to our podcast, but definitely adding also some of the retailers to it in the sense of, how do they select their materials would also be an interesting aspect. I think that brings us to the end of this first episode of the HeroInside Ingredient Brand podcast. Thank you very much, Giulio. As always, it was an absolute pleasure to listen to you, your passion and also your clarity about a more sustainable future, and particularly the circular aspect of it is always an inspiration. So I would say, grazie per il vostro sostegno. Is that properly said?
Thank you, Thomas. It's been a pleasure to have the possibility to talk to you and to be your guest. And thank you for having me again.
This was the amazing first episode of the HeroInside Ingredient Branding podcast with Giulio Bonazzi, the CEO of the Italian company Aquafil, the makers of the ECONYL brand. To share your feedback and questions for this episode, head over to our brand LinkedIn page and join the conversation. The link is also posted in the show notes. Subscribe to the HeroInside podcast to be sure not to miss our upcoming episode, featuring Mr. Noel Hall, the chairman of the executive board of Bast Fiber Tech, with whom I will talk about the first regenerative ingredient brand, Zero. Until then, keep exploring, learning, and working to transform your innovation into a relevant component for a better world.
This has been an episode of HeroInside, the Ingredient Branding podcast with Tomas Vucurevic. Each episode features stories and wisdom from game-changing creators and the shapers of the world's most exciting and influential ingredient brands. To learn more about ingredient branding and Tomas's work, visit brained.co. That's BRAIND.co. Until next time.